So first of all, we know that muscles act across the joint. This is something we've seen in the lab so far. Okay. They usually have a point of origin, closer or more proximal to the body, a point of insertion, more distal, and this is usually across a joint, right? And as a result, you have several muscles acting across this joint. They need to be able to coordinate their movement, right? Coordinate their contraction together to allow for smooth movement or for smooth function. Okay, if you were trying to pick up something and your triceps was fighting against your biceps, so you were both trying to contract at the same time, that would be very clumsy. So muscles have to work together to coordinate smooth, easy movement. Okay, similar with the gastrocnemius muscle. It's moving across a joint, so there needs to be coordination with the lengthening and tensioning across that joint to move that limb. So the point of origin, we want to really point out that this is the fixed point of attachment. Okay, so the origin is not moving. What's moving is the point of insertion. So again, we'll take the biceps muscle. It's attached to the scapula proximally, attached to the radius distally. The attachment of the scapula is not moving, that's fixed. The mobile part of this muscle is where the tendon inserts on the radius. Okay, that's where the pulling happens. Okay, the movement. So also we want to point out that muscles cannot push, they can only pull. Right? So they can only contract, generate force to pull that forearm, pull the radius towards them. Right? The relaxation of muscles is a passive process. It's not generating force to push the limb away. This is just a passive relaxation of that muscle. The muscles only pull, they do not push. And then they are antagonistic in their action. This is again something that we saw in the lab. You have the triceps, they're in the posterior compartment, which is the extensor compartment. You have the biceps and other muscles in the flexor compartment, which is anterior. And those muscles are going to undo the actions of each other. They're going to antagonize each other. Right? Antagonizing means go against or reverse. So if the bicep flexes the forearm, the triceps extends it. Okay, that's what we mean by antagonistic actions. Now there are two receptors that are found in muscle. We're going to talk about those briefly today. The first one is the muscle spindle. And the muscle spindle is found in the muscle body. And the function of the spindle is to detect or sense or pick up the change in the length of the muscle. Okay, that's going to be very important in protecting the muscle against injury. Okay. The second receptor here, the Golgi tendon organ, as the name implies, is found in the tendon of the muscle. And the function of the Golgi tendon organ is to detect the change in tension. So how much stress, how much force do you put on this muscle? And both of these receptors, bear in mind that these are receptors, they're going to pick up information about what's going on in the muscle, send that information to the central nervous system, and this is a protective measure to prevent overexertion or injury in the muscle. Okay. So the first one is the muscle spindle. Okay. And the muscle spindle is part of the inner fibers of the muscle body. So this is your muscle. It has two types of fibers. The extrafusal fibers, I'll talk about those first, because those are the fibers we've been talking about so far. These are the normal contractile fibers of the muscle. Okay, they're responsible for contractile movement of the muscle, and they're going to be innervated by a different type of neuron. They're innervated by an alpha neuron. So we've already talked about the muscle, right? We talked about motor neurons. Here we're going to talk about two different types of motor neurons. So these are your normal, everyday, generic fibers. Then, in the middle of the muscle, there are some modified fibers. These are called intrafusal fibers. And these are modified in such a way that they are associated with some receptor nerve endings. Okay, and this makes them sensitive, right? Being associated with these nerve endings to detect the change in length of the muscle. Let's talk about that a little bit more. All right, so we have our muscle. Now inside the muscle, we have our regular, right, generic fibers out here. These are called extrafusal fibers, okay? And in the center of the muscle, we said we have some modified fibers, modified muscle fibers. These are called your intrafusal fibers. All right. Now these fibers are associated with two sensory nerve endings. And bear in mind, when I say sensory nerve endings, they are going to be picking up information or sensing information that's happening in the muscle. The first one is called, right, it sort of spirals around the intrafusal fiber like this, and it's called an annulospring nerve ending. Okay. And this nerve ending is coming from a type 1A, and this is an afferent fiber. We're going to talk about afferent means in a little bit, right? There's another type of nerve ending here, right? This is going to run off to the side of the intrafusal fiber and attach distally here, okay? This is called a flower spray. I know these names are so weird. A flower spray nerve ending. And this is just describing the way it associates with that muscle. Okay, so we have an annulospring nerve ending, which coils or wraps around the intrafusal fiber like a spring almost. And then the flower spray nerve ending sort of runs off to the side here and then attaches at the bottom. And the flower spray nerve ending is really the ending of a type 2 afferent fiber. And again, we're going to talk about what afferent means here for these. Now, the fibers are also innervated by efferent fibers, efferent neurons, sorry. So the motor neuron that innervates the extrafusal fiber, we talked about this already. This is an alpha motor neuron. And this is an efferent fiber, okay? And the motor neuron that innervates the actual modified muscle, so the intrafusal fiber, is a gamma motor neuron. This is also an, you guys see that? This is also an efferent, okay? Now, the way this is situated, this part of the muscle, right, this entire association here, these intrafusal fibers, along with these two nerve endings, all that together is called the muscle spindle. And the function of the muscle spindle is to detect the change in length of the muscle. Okay, so if the muscle is stretched, the sensory nerve endings that are wrapping around these intrafusal fibers are going to pick up that change in length. And they're going to send a signal back to the spinal cord, which is going to allow a reflex signal to be sent through these efferent fibers to allow this muscle to contract. Now, why does this happen? This is a protective measure for the muscle. Let's say you're holding your hands out, right? And someone drops a pile of books or a very heavy weight into your hands. Your muscle is going to stretch, okay? And the stretching of that muscle is going to react or reflex in contraction of the muscle. Okay, so this is the stretch reflex. Stretching causes contraction. So let's write out what the steps of that process are. And I want you to think in your mind of the scenario of you holding your arms out with no weight in them. Someone drops a heavy weight into your arms. To prevent that muscle from tearing or rupturing, it needs to contract against that weight. okay? If it did not contract, you could damage the muscle. So contraction, right? The detection and the quick reflex of the muscle to contract is a protective measure for the muscle. So let's start here. So the muscle stretches, okay? And the muscle spindle, right? The muscle spindle detects a change in length. Right? That's the first thing that happens. The nerve fibers, those two nerve fibers that we talked about around the muscle spindle, are going to increase their action potential firing. All right, so the next step is increase action potential firing of, right, the afferent nerve endings. Okay, and remember we talked about afferent versus efferent early on this semester. We said afferent fibers are taking information from the tissue, from the muscle, about what's happening in that area to the central nervous system. We said efferent fibers are doing the opposite. They're bringing a response back to the tissue. Okay, that's the same principle we're following here. So the increase of action potential firing by those afferent fibers, which are these nerve endings that are associated with the spindle, is going to go to the central nervous system, specifically the spinal cord. This is a reflex, all right? And it being a reflex means that we do not need the higher centers of the brain. We do not need to be conscious about this. Okay, this is going to happen without our conscious proprioception. All right, so the spinal cord is then going to send a reflex signal. All right, so the reflex signal is going to be sent to the same muscle group to contract, right? So it's going to be the same muscle group, and that same muscle group is going to contract. Okay. And this is the basis of your patella reflex. Have you guys heard of the patella reflex? You're sitting on a table, a doctor takes the reflex hammer and sort of knocks gently on your tendon. That sort of bubbles the tendon, which creates a stretch, okay? And as a result, afferent fibers send that signal to your spinal cord, right? And very quickly, your spinal cord sends back a signal to that same muscle group for it to contract or shorten. So stretching the muscle increases firing action potentials and results in contracting that muscle, which again is a protective measure for the muscle, okay? And that is the muscle spindle or the stretch reflex.